Thanks, Senator. Your first question is going to come from the audience right here in front of you.
Senator, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you with us today. My name is Steve Oval, and I'm a board member of the local Heritage Area Agency on Aging. I know that a growing number of aging Iowans and their caregivers are having a very difficult time finding and paying for long-term services and supports, especially in rural parts of the state, in Iowa and across the country. People want to maintain their physical and mental well-being in their home of choice. Federal funding tied to the Older Americans Act has not kept up with this growing population. Do you plan to support the reauthorization of the Older Americans Act that allows older persons to remain in their homes of choice? And will you support increased funding to ensure services availability will improve?
I thank you for the question. I do support the reauthorization, and I would support additional funding for the reasons that you said. We have many people that live in rural Colorado that want to stay at home just like other people do, and we need to make sure that they're able to do that. And I think better funding is part of that. Also supporting things like telemedicine and other opportunities for people to stay in their homes and be supported by caregivers who actually get paid for the work that they do, I think would help as well. So thank you.
You mentioned caregivers getting paid. Millions of Americans do get paid, but it's at a job that they have to juggle with the unpaid work of caregiving for their family. So how do you make life easier for those caregivers?
Or a job they have to give up. I think that the AARP numbers are that 240 million Americans are involved in caregiving for an adult, and that caregiving itself is worth $480 billion to this country. At the same time, people are having to give up often their jobs and their earning power at a moment in their life when their earning power is going to be the greatest. So this is a terrible challenge for us as a country. I've been the co-chair of something called the Caregivers Caucus in the Senate, which AARP has been a strong supporter of. We developed, and I've long supported, a tax credit that would benefit people that are caregivers at home to recognize the value of that care, so that, because we're not getting that for free. And especially for family members now who both have young children at home and may have a parent that has Alzheimer's or another chronic condition, it's unfair for us just to rely on that and not treat it as if it's actually contributing mightily to the society, because it is.
One of your colleagues has raised the idea of a universal basic income to help with direct caregivers. Is that an idea that has merit?
I think that's not an idea that America is ready for, because I just think people in this country want to work, and we expect people to work. A better idea, though, since you asked the question, is my American Family Act that would dramatically increase the child tax credit in this country, and it would mean that families would have $300 a month to be able to use to spend on housing, health care, early childhood education, or taking care of somebody that needed to be taken care of. And that bill, by the way, would apply to grandparents as well as parents. And it would be fully refundable, which means millions of kids that today don't benefit from it because of the insistence that it not be from first dollar, now would benefit. And it would reduce childhood poverty in America by 40%. It would end $2 a day poverty in America, which, as a former school superintendent, I can tell you would make a huge difference in terms of educational outcomes in this country.
Another piece of legislation you're co-sponsoring deals with prescription drug prices. And it essentially sets up a process for citizen petition and trying to pressure the FDA to act in regards to brand name drugs. How would that work?
I think that it's to get the public on record in front of the FDA. I think the most important thing that we can do is require the federal government to negotiate drug prices on behalf of seniors, on behalf of Medicare. My public option plan, which is called Medicare X, which I hope I'll have the chance to talk about in a minute.
We will.
You will.
So I'm going to leave, but I'm going to leave that to one side. But like other pieces of legislation, requires that that the federal government negotiate drug prices. It's long overdue. This issue on drug prices is something every one of us is hearing in every one of our town halls. It's time for us to respond to the American people.
What about importing drugs from Canada? You opposed that.
Yeah, I don't think that actually is a practical solution. I know that's not a popular position, but I want to be honest about it. Our economy is 9 times the size of Canada's. If we began to allow importation from Canada at scale, Canada would change their pricing overnight. The reason they have the pricing they have is because they've been able to negotiate with pharma in ways that we have not. We should not have to go to another country to get drugs that are at a reasonable price, or to go buy a drug there that costs 11 times less than it does here in the case of insulin. That is an outrage. But I think what we need is a real solution for that, not force caravans of seniors to have to go to Canada to buy drugs they should be able to get at their pharmacy around the corner.
Several of your competitors have proposed some sort of indexing in different ways, but essentially having the federal government determine what the fair price is, and then sort of crack down on any pharmaceutical company that charges above that fair price. Is that something you see working?
Yeah, I think there's merit to that idea. I think there's merit to benchmarking our prices against international norms. There are lots of different ways we can do it, but what we can't do is perpetuate the system that we have today. Because people in all over the country are having to decide between food and medicine. This is the only country in the industrialized world where that's true, and it shouldn't be true here.
So you had a news conference just over the noon hour here, talking about your healthcare plan, which, as you said, is called Medicare X. What's the difference between your plan and Medicare for All? Why is it better?
It's very different, and it's much better, if I do say so myself. First of all, it has a great name, Medicare X. But look, there are a lot of people in America who are making too much money to be on Medicaid, and they're not making enough money to afford health insurance. There are millions of people that are in that category. My bill, Medicare X, creates a true public option administered by Medicare. So it's not Medicare itself. I want to come back to that. Administered by Medicare that would allow everybody in America to decide for their family whether they wanted a public option or whether they wanted to hold on to the employee insurance that they have. It puts the choice in the hands of American citizens who may have different points of view about what they want. Medicare for All is the opposite of that. Medicare for All takes insurance away from 180 million people who get it from their employer. It takes Medicare Advantage away from 22 million Americans. 120,000 Iowans would lose Medicare Advantage as a result of Medicare for All. Medicare for All means that every single union that's negotiated for health benefits would lose those health plans. I don't see any reason why we have to do that. I want us to have universal health care in this country. And people, a lot of members of AARP that are not yet 65 would benefit a lot from my plan. They could cut their costs in half by having a public option like the one that I've proposed. I see no reason why it makes sense to take insurance away from 180 million people to try to give insurance to everybody in America. And by the way, it's not just what I believe. The polling shows that the American people don't support that. And so I think it's very important for the Democratic Party to be very honest going into this election about what we're for. If we're for Medicare for All, we're for taking it away from 180 million people before they get it again. And in fairness to Bernie, he replaces it. So, you know, it's not as though there's not anything there, but it's the government deciding what your insurance is. And we have to raise taxes massively in this country to pay for it. My option, we don't have to raise taxes for, and we can still get universal coverage. That's a big, big difference. Somebody described it today as a nuance. There's nothing nuanced about almost 200 million people having to go on a government plan just because Bernie Sanders says it's what everybody should have.
You mentioned others in your party, but they argue that there can't be universal health coverage if for-profit insurers make their money from taking your premiums and then paying out as little as possible in healthcare benefits.
Yeah, I am not defending private insurance companies. That's not my point. My point is millions of people in this country that don't yet have health insurance need health insurance, and we need to find a responsible path to get it from them. Under my plan, if it turns out that it's true, that what I've proposed is much more valuable than the current private system, people will migrate off the private system, and we will have a universal system of public health insurance. And actually, I think my plan would create competition that would force private insurers to cut their prices or be priced out of the market. This is something we should have had when we passed the Affordable Care Act originally. This was a big weakness in the Affordable Care Act. It was something that I fought for back then, believed that we needed very much to make the whole thing work, and now, I'm fighting for it as somebody who's running for president.
As an educator, I'm guessing you have a public pension waiting for you?
Not mine isn't that big. I spent 5 years working there, but yeah.
Former Senator Tom Harkin suggested there should be created some sort of option for employees, that a system that was government run in which you can invest, and then it's portable from wherever you go, and your employer can contribute to it and you can contribute to it, but it's managed by the government. Does that seem reasonable to you?
It seems very reasonable to me. And Tom Harkin was somebody, I worked on his committee. He was the chairman of my committee, and we worked together on the Agriculture Committee as well. So
but if you give government that money, Social Security beneficiaries are seeing the trust fund rated. Wouldn't that fund be rated?
Well, we can't let the Social Security Trust Fund be rated. We absolutely can't do that. And that's another point I wanted to make about Medicare for All. Now you've prompted it, which is I am not screwing around with your trust fund. I've kept my public option outside of the trust fund because we need to make sure the trust fund is there for people who've paid into Medicare their whole lives and will come into Medicare when they're 65 years old. That's why I've kept it separate. And I believe that we have to shore up Social Security, but if there are things we can do to supplement that, we should look at that. The other point here that's important is that for the last 40 years in this country, 90% of the American people basically haven't gotten a pay raise. And all the benefit of the economic growth has gone to the wealthiest people in this country. People can't save under those conditions. And that's one of the reasons why we need an economy that when it grows, it actually grows for everybody so that they can start to build a savings nest egg for the future.
Before Kathy moves to the next topic, let's keep talking about pensions and Social Security benefits. How would you ensure that Social Security remains solvent and available for younger generations?
I think that the best thing we could do is lift the cap on the payroll tax, and that would be an enormous step forward. To
lift it or get rid of it?
I'd be open to either one.
Okay.
And you know what else? Younger people don't think it's going to be there for them. And we need to give them hope that it will be there for them. It's another one of those things where we need to see that we're all in this together and that we all have a reason to want to, we should have a reason to want to work together, which is why we've got to change the politics in D.C.
Your state, of course, legalized marijuana for recreation and medicine, but it remains in conflict.
No, I did not bring any with me. People that are here.
Oh,
I'm sorry about that.
Well, do people ask you that a lot?
They do. They do. They check my pockets. If I leave my jacket hanging on anything, they go through it before I get back there.
Normally it's the people who have to protect their pockets from the politicians. So wow.
That's fair.
Well, your state remains in conflict with federal law by doing this. What would be your policy as president? And if Congress doesn't change the laws, would you just refuse to enforce it?
Well, I don't think you can refuse to enforce the laws. I think it would be really important to decriminalize marijuana. There's no reason for it to be a Schedule I drug. And I think that there's a lot we could do on the banking regulations without Congress's help that could allow these businesses to be banked properly by local banks, which is something we need to do. You might be interested to know that there are senior citizen homes in my state where about once or twice a week, a little van shows up in the parking lot. The door opens up and people walk, they get on the van, they go to the marijuana dispensary, they buy what they want, and they come back later.
Okay, well, I mean, has the FDA, do you think the FDA needs to do more to test and make sure
Absolutely.
that there's not,
Yes.
And would you propose that as president?
I think, look, my priority would be making sure that we were decriminalizing it, that people weren't in jail for marijuana, and that we were dealing with banking regulation. But we also need to do research on all this stuff. All we have is anecdotal research. And that's not good enough. We need to research it more. And also, as somebody who used to work in the Denver public schools, I believe it's really important that adolescents, who are people whose brains are developing, are not accessing marijuana. That's a really important thing. And as a country, we've got to figure out how to do that.
Some of your former students likely did not have high-speed internet access at home. There are millions of older Americans who would like to have it, can't afford it.
Yep.
How do you address not only the ability to pay for it, but also the availability?
Yep. So you are right about my former students. And when you're in the 21st century and you're telling people that some students have access to high-speed internet and other students don't have access to high-speed internet, you might as well be saying to some students, you're going to have access to textbooks, and another group of students, you're not going to have access to textbooks. It's deeply unfair and it's wrong. And in rural parts of this country, which don't have access to high-speed internet often, it means the difference between people being able to build a business or not build a business, or stay in their home, as we were talking about at the outset, and be able to consult with their doctor. How to pay for it? This is an interesting question. So since 2001, Washington has cut taxes by $5 trillion, and almost all the benefit of that has gone to the wealthiest people in America. $5 trillion. And what it's done is exacerbate the income inequality we have rather than solve it. We've spent $5.6 trillion in the Middle East. So that's about $12 trillion that, from the point of view of investing in America, we might as well just have lit on fire. So my first thing would be to stop lighting that stuff on fire. Because what we know is if we had spent that money in America, we could have literally fixed every bridge that's broken in America. We could have fixed every road that's broken in America. We could have, the entire infrastructure backlog for airports and ports, we could have taken care of. We could have made Social Security solvent for my children. We could have paid every teacher in America. We could have given them a 50% raise, or given preschool to everybody in America. And we could have built out high-speed internet to everyone in America, and paid down some of our deficit that we're threatening the next generation with. We did none of that. And I think it all is a matter of the priorities that we have. And I believe we can do it, and we have to do it.
You mentioned infrastructure a minute ago. Colorado is actually considered to be a good state for people with mobility issues.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that the Americans with Disabilities Act is enforced and paid attention to across the entire country?
I think we need to make sure that, that it is enforced, that the citizen provisions that are part of that are taken seriously, that we've got a federal government that actually is enforcing it rather than ignoring it, which we have today. Colorado is known for it because we've made a real commitment to it, and mobility has been a big issue in a state like ours, where lifestyle and making sure people stay healthy as they age has been critical to the success, I think, of our state, and to keep people working in our state. And I think we should do that nationally.
What about the ADA does have some applications with technology, including businesses that issue mobile apps that need to be legible to people of differing abilities. But as technology advances, more and more opportunities are available. How do you make sure that the ADA's vision applies to that?
This is such an important question. This is a continuing, nobody has ever asked me this question in a town. No, it's incredible because it is, these things are changing on a daily basis. And on the one hand, you want to make sure that the ADA is being subscribed to, and on the other hand, you don't want to slow down the benefits of the technology either. So we are going to have to work very hard to ramp up the regulatory process in Washington so it can catch up to the 21st century technology we have. That doesn't mean we should in any way sacrifice the values that we place on accessibility, but it also means that we want to make sure that where technology is driving accessibility, we're not gumming it up so much that we can't do what needs to be done. This is a daily issue in Washington at this point when you think about these agencies like the FDA, for instance, if you're in a world of personalized medicine where cures are being determined based on the specific DNA that each of us has as an individual, we're going to have to change completely the way we approach this regulation in order to be able to drive great health outcomes for people, but also get the technology in place.
Does the reverse mortgage industry need to be regulated?
Yes, the reverse.
How so?
Well, I just think that, when you got a bunch of TV ads out there claiming that, you're going to be rich because of reverse mortgages, we need to do better than that. I haven't looked into it, but it's something that we should certainly regulate.
You recently went through successful treatment for prostate cancer. I hope you're feeling well. Yeah. What would you do as president to advance cancer research and move toward better treatments?
So thank you for raising it. A couple things. One, I was trying to decide to run for president. I was talking to my family. The only one who wanted me to run from the very beginning was my 14-year-old daughter, who saw it as a way of keeping me out of the house. But the others were inclined for me to do it and wanted me to do it. And then I got prostate cancer. And then I sat down with my kids and I said, I have cancer. And that 14-year-old had no reaction at all. And I'm like, Ann, you don't seem very worried about this. And she said, oh, Mrs. Jones, my biology teacher, said it's very likely that you'll get it and it'll be okay. And I said, well, good, I'm glad. And in my case, it was because I had a primary care doctor and I had insurance and I had a screening. I had no symptoms at all. And this is why we need universal health care coverage in America. If I hadn't had that coverage, I would be sitting here talking to you with prostate cancer instead of having had it cured. So anybody who's got a prostate, go get your prostate checked. And if you don't, get something else checked. And on the cancer stuff, we are making, seriously, you should, by a real doctor. We are making incredible progress on cancer, and it's been a great privilege for me to work with members of the Republican Party. Richard Burr, in particular, is from North Carolina. He and I wrote a bill called Breakthrough Therapies, which reduced the amount of time that FDA, to go back to the earlier conversation we were having, would use to approve drugs that were really promising in even a small group of people. And that we were supposed to get 1 or 2 drugs a year out of that. And today, I looked it up today, we've had 140 drugs approved as a result of breakthrough therapies, and over half of those are cancer drugs. So I also would make sure that we invested in cancer research the way that the Obama administration was committed to it, and I give Vice President Biden a lot of credit for his leadership on that issue.
Is he being a little over-optimistic, though, and suggesting that he can cure cancer?
I don't know. I'd rather have somebody be optimistic than pessimistic about it. I can tell you this, there'd be no reason for optimism if we keep the folks in there that are in there today that are spending all their time trying to strangle every single dollar that we could put to the NIH and to research so they can give wealthy people tax cuts that they can't spend. That'd be good to change.
Kay has the last question.
I think this is the last question. Circling back to Social Security, something like 20% of Americans who are over the age of 65 are either currently working or they're looking for a job.
Yep.
Do you need to change Social Security to allow people to work more hours and still retain their benefits?
I've not looked at that, but I would be open to that. I think that sounds like a good idea. There are all kinds of places in our safety net programs where we have these cliffs, like the one that you just described, that result in people not maximizing their productive potential. That sounds like one, and we should be maximizing people's productive potential. Another one, I met with people this thing's going to say stop. So
Don't
the
worry.
same thing happens. The same thing happens with Medicaid, where people on Medicaid who want to work have to lose their health insurance if they work because they're making too much money. This makes no sense. We should be addressing the world as it is. People in this country want to work. People want to be productive. Senior citizens want to be productive, and we should, as long as people want to work, we should make sure the programs we have don't disincentivize them from working.
Thank you for following the clock. We appreciate that. But I'm gonna actually give you another 30 seconds to wrap up if you like.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm very grateful to have the chance. Look, there are a lot of reasons to be discouraged about where we are as a country. I think we shouldn't be discouraged. I think we should be optimistic, not pessimistic. And I don't need to tell the people in this audience that in the past, we have treated moments like this like opportunities. These are huge, these are very challenging times. They're not nearly as challenging as some of the times that people in this audience have already lived through. They're not nearly as challenging as the kind of things that my mom and her family had to live through the Holocaust in Warsaw, Poland. And I think we're at a moment in our political history when we need to treat each other as Americans, you know, not as enemies. We need to treat each other as friends. There's too much work for us to do together to make sure that we're not the first generation to leave less opportunity, not more, to the people that are coming after us, to make sure that we restore America's leadership in the world. Our politics was broken before Donald Trump became president. In my mind, he's a symptom of our broken politics more than he is the cause of it, although I would say I think he's made matters much worse. But for me, this isn't just about beating Donald Trump. It's about beating Donald Trump and then beginning again to govern this country so that we can fulfill the promise of our founders in this exercise in self-government that's 230 years old. With the rise of China, that surveillance state, this form of government and this way that humans are organized has never been needed more than at this moment. And that's going to be not up to the person that's in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's going to be up to all of us to do our job as citizens, just as our parents and grandparents did it for us. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.